I chain smoke and I say fuck a lot. But I accept myself for the way I am. I accept you too. Viewer discretion advised.
The story is complicated. It involves our perceptions of the medical establishment, of how we think about the disease called AIDS, how we think about HIV testing, how we think about pharmaceutical companies, and I think for me it was a real revelation.
Continuing from my last video, Dumb Docs, about Jonathan Fishbein, the whistleblower from NIH. Here he goes on about the NIH funding foster homes for toxic AIDS drugs trials. I've covered this before for a video called Fauci's Guinea Pigs. I'll leave the link below, but we're going to look into it again.
Now let's go to the foster children, which I think was the most, to me, it was Tuskegee with foster children.
That was the most egregious.
Yeah. In the 80s and 90s, there were these AIDS drugs, and sometimes it was difficult to get parental permission to test experimental drugs on children. Why? AIDS drugs have very toxic side effects. Fauci and his team, the AIDS team and Fauci, went to the foster system in several cities. I think Pittsburgh and the city of New York were two that I remember. And they convinced these cities to, the wards, the people who were watching the foster children, to enroll their HIV-infected foster children in these studies so that they can get efficacy and safety data on them and do that.
Some of the trials, some of the protocols say that the children are, and I quote, presumed to be HIV positive. Now, what kind of society are we that children who are only presumed, and by whom are they presumed? What criteria makes them presumed to be HIV, that those children then get exposed to as many as 7 highly toxic experimental drugs?
And what I uncovered was that the promise that Dr. Fauci and his team made to these foster children agencies is, for every child that you allow to enroll in this, we're going to give them an advocate, a patient advocate, to watch their well-being like their parents, because they're disconnected from their parents when you're a foster child. This patient advocate will watch the data, they'll be briefed, and they'll protect that child's personal and safety interests as they go through this, very toxic drug trial. And it turns out that in almost all those cases, the NIAID, Fauci's division, didn't provide that advocate after the fact. And what I dug up in records was there were 10 unexplained deaths of foster children in this trial. 10, not 1, 10, very large number. And the ultimate investigation concluded that these were unexplained, mysterious deaths that were very troubling because of the fact that NIAID had not given them the protections of an advocate, somebody to watch out and be that child's parent as these drugs were being administered to. So very much like the Tuskegee syphilis experiment in the 40s.
In 92, the NIH decided that this population was going to be as good as any to test drugs on.
Aren't there rules against testing on children?
Yes, there are.
Under federal rules, consent for children to take part in drug trials has to be given by their parent or guardian. But the kids at Incarnation have no independent voice. The body that is their legal guardian, the ACS, is the same body that makes the children available for trials.
National Institute of Health rules against using wards of the state in clinical trials. But
how did they get around this?
Well, you get around it by appealing to public sympathy. If you go with the definition of AIDS that we have, which is a single cause, illness with no cure, blah blah blah, caused by one thing, instead of what it appears to be, the multifactorial, complex, treatable illness that occurs around the world because of poverty, drug toxicity, and other things. If you go with the first view, you can do anything you want.
So basically they're saying these babies have a death sentence anyway. It doesn't matter what we do. We can just do anything we need to do.
We're saving their lives.
Well, it is shocking that in New York City, experimental drug treatments are being used on children who are in foster care.
Even senior politicians in the city have found it impossible to get information about the trials. Bill Perkins is Deputy Majority Leader on New York City Council.
We do know that several have passed away during the course of these experiments, and we know that there are still some involved. And there's been somewhat of a secrecy about the whole matter, I must say. It has not been easy to get through the bureaucracy as to exactly what this is all about.
We're using toxic drugs on infants. We're using toxic drugs on children. Toxic drugs that cause genetic mutation, organ failure, bone marrow death, bodily deformations, brain damage, and fatal skin disorders. We're using that on orphans.
We're using that on orphans, and we're saying we're doing them a favor.
In a mass grave owned by the Roman Catholic Church close to Manhattan, over 1,000 children's bodies, including some who were enrolled in the trials, lie beneath a tarpaulin. Officially, their deaths are recorded only as resulting from natural causes. For months, we tried to get answers from those behind the trials. From Columbia Presbyterian Hospital, where many of the tests were devised. From Incarnation Children's Center, from the Catholic Church. And from the ACS, the authority ultimately responsible. None would comment. The drug companies which have supported trials at Incarnation include some of the world's largest.
What were some of the physical reasons that they were saying, I don't want this?
Some of them, they made them so sick that they couldn't get up and go to school. Or when they were in school, they couldn't function like the regular kids, so they just didn't, they didn't want it for whatever reason.
When they got sick, what kind of symptoms did they display?
Stomach cramping, mostly that, and constant diarrhea, that wouldn't allow them to stay focused in a classroom like a regular child would. Sleepy, a lot of the kids, they were drugged so much that they were just tired. They just couldn't function.
And Mimi, when the children refused to take the drugs, what would happen to them?
You could only refuse X amount of times. After that, you get a tube inserted into a G tube.
A G tube was inserted into the children. Did you insert that, or how did they?
Oh no, those are surgically put in.
So they were sent to doctors to get tubes that to put into their bellies to take the drugs.
Yeah. One of my kids came in, and a couple of months later, she came in, she was fine. She had a stroke, and she went blind. And
after being given these meds.
Yes, because supposedly her case was she wasn't aware of her HIV status. So if you wasn't aware, you wasn't taking medicine. You're in there for that.
The perception there, and this is sort of drummed into everybody's head, is that the drugs will make you live longer. Longer than what? Longer than the perception that you're supposed to die at a certain age. So they'll say that the effects are very, 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 very strong, terrible. As Mimi says, a girl who had never been told that she was positive, therefore never took the drugs and was not sick, came in, and within a few months on these drugs, AZT and others, had a stroke, went blind, and died a few months later. Can't tell me that she lived longer. I don't think Mimi would say that either. But the general perception, and from doctors who want to defend this kind of thing is, yeah, they'll live longer than what? Not than they lived, than they were supposed to live. Who decided? The doctors decided.
And if the prognosis is that you're going to die, I guess any day past that is something that you could argue is proof of your argument. It's very circular logic, and it only works in favor of the drug companies, not the children.
When that hit, you were still inside the NIH when I broke that story. Mm-hmm. Describe the culture and the reaction inside Dr. Fauci's division when that one landed and the public outcry began.
Well, the official stance was, but we provided these children with life-saving drugs they otherwise would not have had access to.
Yes.
That was the excuse.
It meant a lot to the 10 that died, I'm sure.
Yes. But down sort of among the workers, a lot of us were very concerned. It was embarrassing. Yeah. It was embarrassing because they knew that's not what you do. That was absolutely reprehensible.
Fucking stoned.
I got